Welcome to Roundtable Decision. No. Welcome to Roundtable Decision. I am your host, Wyatt Bricknoff. And for today's video is going to be semi-COVID-19 related, or you could say largely COVID-19 related, as I'm going to be talking about the protest from COVID-19 and people wanting to get back to work. But before I get into the video, I wanted to have a few announcements. I don't really want my channel to be just over COVID-19 news and political drama around COVID-19, although that is almost always what is in news. So I do have a couple of psychology type of videos coming up, as well as a history video that I'm thinking about making. And I also am going to have my book stream tomorrow, probably around 2 or 3 Eastern time, so you can look forward to that. That's just a few things I wanted to get out of the way before I really start in the video now. But as we all know, COVID-19 has been huge, if not greatly huge, in the world and in America, in the United States, and within your individual states. And there's been a lot of states that have protested: North Carolina, Texas, Michigan, the Capitol, Kentucky, a lot of states overall, and I know I'm missing several others, but those are just the top off of my head as of now. And most recently, as of yesterday, was a Kentucky protest. Or, well, let's say it didn't happen yesterday, but the results from the protest have happened. Before I get into the tangent of the article and in that section of the video, a lot of people were theorizing what might have happened from these protests. Because as we all know, the CDC and general health guidelines have said that we have to maintain a 6-foot difference from each other, and they have suggested wearing masks. And although a lot of people don't really like masks and don't think that masks really work very well, it was a suggestion that the government eventually decided to make on. And I can go on a whole separate tangent about masks that Actual Justice Warrior, a YouTuber, made a good video about. If it was either Actual Justice Warrior or Productions, what was his name? Anyway, I'll link the video when I remember exactly what it was. It may have been Don't Walk Run Productions who made that video. But either way, they make similar content, and it's very interesting point to the video itself. Anyway, so a lot of people are theorizing what they might have thought would happen from these protests, because obviously these protests are not withstanding the CDC guidelines, as people are standing next to each other and definitely not 6 feet apart. And a lot of people, as you can see in this picture from the video, are not wearing masks. So besides talking about why people are protesting and just taking that into hand, there has been this article talking about how there's been several new cases coming from COVID-19 people from the large protest group that happened. And I'll read from this article as it says, "We are still in the midst of a fight against a deadly and highly contagious virus," Beecher said. "Let's make sure, as much as we are looking at those benchmarks and we are looking at the future, that we are acting in the present and we are not doing things that it takes to protect one another." So obviously that was a very big theme coming from it, because a lot of people were arguing or thinking about the fact that these protests could eventually set the country back further, or at least set the state back further. Ooh, I can't talk. Anyway, and in Texas, that was a large point that you heard from the general stations like CNN and also from local news stations. As I live in Texas, I've heard a lot about it, and my work tends to have news on in the breaking room. But long story short, a lot of people were worried that Texas hasn't hit their peak amount of cases yet. And by the Texas protest, who I'm about to talk about in a little bit, there could be a large spread of COVID-19 cases from within that protest. As I'll go to the Texas article I have here. And of course, it's going to be... Okay, I guess not. We're not doing that article. That's what I hate about all these mass media websites. It worked for me earlier, and obviously when I want to make a video about it, it doesn't work. No figure. Anyway, before I could get on the whole side tangent with that. So, but all these protests have been rather interesting, and people obviously have the right to protest, and I'm going to talk about that point before I move on. The right to protest is definitely within the First Amendment and is very important for Americans and for America to maintain their patriotic nature that we need to have and what makes us independent from all other nations. It's very American to tell you what they think. And obviously America has had its moments of protest, but they're not as protest heavy as foreign countries like France. So you kind of take that into hand. So by the fact that there actually are protests is rather interesting, and as a whole side note to protesting in general. But in relation to coronavirus, I thought Michigan did a very clever thing of their protest, and essentially they protested in their own vehicles, and they would have Trump signs, American flags, and other homemade signs basically talking about opening the country or opening their state back up for jobs and for work and for money. As obviously the big news around COVID-19 was the stimulus checks that eventually people have, but a lot of people are still missing, and some people are even relying on. A lot of people are not fortunate enough to be without work for this long and not suffer from it. There are very few amount of people that can be without work if they got fired or furloughed or whatever term you want to use, and can't go back to work for a couple more months. That just can't happen for a lot of Americans. And landlords right now are being declared as enemies of the state and enemies of the country due to the fact that landlords need their money from their tenants in order to maintain the actual place the tenants are living in. But it's become a very big problem, and a lot of news agencies and talk show hosts are making these landlords seem like villains, which is a rather complex thing to handle. And the government has issued certain laws, you would say, that are giving tenants a little extra time to get the money to their landlords, and they're making the landlords wait a little longer, and that the landlords have to be nicer. But then again, it's a very complex situation because a lot of these landlords are making their money from their tenants and from the properties they own from it. So it's a very complex issue around an economy and trying to open things back up. And obviously the government and individual states as a whole haven't opened up very much. Texas is talking about opening up their economy this next week, or this week. I'm pretty sure it was next week as far as a whole sector of things. But like retail stores are going to have to do like curbside deliveries and curbside deliveries, which is interesting from a retailer's perspective. I'm not sure exactly how that's going to work, but either way, Governor Abbott of Texas is trying to open the economy back up. Because as I've said, a lot of people just can't handle without being without a job for this long. And that is ultimately what the protests are about. And I would highly suggest checking out Matt Christensen's channel and live stream he did on Sunday about this Michigan protest, as I thought Blonde and Matt, who are both hosts of the show, did a very good job talking about this Michigan protest and brought up several good points. And besides just repeating what they said, it would be interesting if you checked out his channel as well, because he is a very good YouTuber who I highly suggest to you. But I did think it was a clever idea protesting in the car, because technically the CDC guidelines are still met. So then this last article kind of talks about why the protest shouldn't be done and why COVID-19 could expand greatly, similar to the first article. And I'm mainly just showing this article now to have it in my link in case you want to kind of read about it as a whole, because why do I keep saying to read about it more? Because I did think it was an interesting article to read besides that first one. But I'm not really going to talk about it too much. But protest in general is the First Amendment right, and Americans are allowed to do it and should do it. The fact is, should they have protested with masks and maintained a distance is up for a debate. And I do think that is a little bit silly when talking about American lives being on stake.